Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alan Schimmel, CEO, founder of Techstrong Group, and you're listening to a Techstrong or watching a Techstrong learning event here. And it is the very first time we're doing this particular one, this brand. It's actually based on a video show that we've been doing for a number of years. We call it the Open Mainframe, and Techstrong produces this series in partnership with our good friends at the Open Mainframe Project from the Linux Foundation. As I said, we've been producing that video series for about 2 years, and every Open Mainframe episode is available on techstrong.tv. But today we wanted to try something different. Rather than just having the esteemed panels that we always have on our show, we're opening it up to you, our audience. So this is your chance to ask the experts questions. It's your chance to say what you want to say about mainframe, and we're going to be talking about Project Zowe today. It's your chance to really drive the conversation. How do you do that? Well, we use something called the Big Marker communication or webinar system, and we like it, number one, because it just runs right in your browser, no plugins, no anything, and it makes it easy to use. The second reason we like it, though, is it has this fantastic communications interface. And for most of you, that is on the far right side of your browser window. And you'll see it there. For most of you, it'll be the word chat in black and bold letters. And then next to it, grayed out, is QA and handouts, etc. Underneath chat, you'll see public, private, Twitter. Don't concern yourself too much with the Twitter, and we discourage you from using private chat. This isn't a Tinder app or anything like that. And a lot of people get a little freaky when people, reach out to them on private chat with that. We do ask to use public chat, and of course it is public. So when you put it out here, everyone logged on to the webinar today can see that. And so I wouldn't put anything that you're not comfortable with everyone seeing. In addition to the chat, as I mentioned, next to chat is the word Q&A or the phrase Q&A grayed out. And you can click on that as well. What's the difference between chat and Q&A? Well, when you put something on chat, it's going right out to everyone here, including our panelists, including all the attendees. When you put it in Q&A, it's basically our presenters who can see that, and you're letting us know that this is something you want elevated up to the panel at large to discuss, whether it's a question, a comment, an ask, what have you. In chat, it may be another a presenter who answers your question. It could be another attendee who answers your questions or adds on to the question. So kind of two different uses, but similar. So do use the chat and QA. And I always like to make sure everyone knows how to use the chat and it's working. So I'll always usually log in and say hello I'm in sunny Boca Raton, Florida today, though it's not really that sunny anymore. Before I even asked, I see many of you have already logged on and tell us where you're from. And that's one of the real, for me, I still get tickled. I've been on the internet since the internet went commercial and even before that. But when I log on to an event like this and I see that people are logging in really from all over the world, it kind of still gets me going, right? That, from right next door to China and back and everywhere in between, people log on to these and participate with us. And I love that kind of participation. So I appreciate you logging on, telling us where you're from. Yes, it is always sunny in Sacramento. It gets really hot in Sacramento, too. I've been out there in the summertime. But it gets really hot here in Florida as well, and humid. Anyway, so that's our communication. And guys, you drive this webinar. So don't be shy. Put it out there. Once we start, put your questions in chat or Q&A, and we'll do our best to get to them all. As I mentioned, the Open Mainframe is a joint production with our good friends at the Open Mainframe Project at Linux Foundation. The Open Mainframe Project is actually sort of an umbrella foundation that has 20 some odd different projects, committees, and initiatives underneath it. And I think we'll maybe hear a little bit about that from our friend John Murdoch in a bit. But today's show is really focused on perhaps the biggest project within Open Mainframe, and that's Project Zowe. If you don't know about Project Zowe, you're going to find out today about Project Zowe. But it really has, I don't want to say it set the mainframe world ablaze, but it's really one of the most exciting things to happen in mainframe in years. And I think our panel is going to agree with that and tell you more about it. So that's the subject matter today. Let us now get to our panel members, if it's okay. I want to first introduce Joe Winchester. Why don't you give people your background, kind of introduce yourself?
Hey, Alan, thanks very much for that. Yeah, so my name is Joe Winchester, and I live and work in England. That's England in the United Kingdom. I can see some people are teasing me in the chat about England in Texas. So I've been involved with the Zowe project ever since its inception, which is something that I'm very proud of. And what amazes me most about the Zowe project is when we first got together, we had this tagline called "All of the old with all of the new." And this year is actually when the IBM 360, which is the kind of originator of the sort of thoroughly modern IBM Z computing platform, was first created. It's really nice to be able to for Zowe to be very well positioned in bringing forward all of the great incumbent technology that the world relies on mainframe computing platform, but also welcoming all of the practices and tool chains for the newer generation coming out of college and who've grown up around Linux platforms. So happy to be here, Alan. Thank
you. We're happy to have you, Joe. Joe has been on several of our pre-recorded, series of open mainframes, and he always brings so much knowledge and goodness to it. We're happy to have him here. Next, speaking of knowledge and goodness, let me introduce you to our next guest. It's Rose Seatch. She might be the hidden power behind the whole Open Mainframe project. She keeps things running, highly organized, and also just a wealth of information on this stuff. Rose, welcome, and maybe introduce yourself.
Wow, great introduction. Thank you. Thank you, Alan. So yes, I am Rose Seatch. I am an offering manager at Broadcom, but more importantly, I have a number of roles within the Zowe community. I lead the onboarding squad. I currently chair the Zowe Advisory Council. I'm a member of the Technical Steering Committee, as well as a member of the Security Work Group. And similar to Joe, I sort of go where Zowe goes and love to be a part of all of the potential incubators and offshoot projects and what have you. I've been in the mainframe business. Gosh, it's coming up on 40 years. My career started in 1984 as a mainframe programmer for a local bank here in Rhode Island. I lived in Rhode Island. I'm now in southern Massachusetts, south of Boston. But I was not an original Zowe member. I was at the Share Conference in 2018 when Zowe was introduced. I knew of it a little bit, but I'll tell you, when that announcement was made on stage, I knew that I needed to be a part of this project. It's something that, in my opinion, is history worthy. I felt, that we all have the ability to make history by being a part of mainframe being open, if you will. And I believe it is truly a game changer for the mainframe platform. Thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Rose, we're thrilled to have you here. just 40 years, man. That's a right.
Yeah.
Good for you. Good for you. Our next panel member comes to us, and is Jeff Charrington. And Jeff, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Alan. I'm Jeff Charrington. I'm the Vice President of Product Management for the Infrastructure Modernization Business Unit at Rocket Software. Essentially, we're the mainframe business unit. And those of you who may not recognize Rocket, we have been a mainframe software provider for over 30 years, most of it through the IBM channel. We've provided engineering excellence for IBM since the very beginning of the company, and we still engineer, enhance, and support very familiar offerings like the Megamon performance monitors, DB2 tools and utilities, IMS tools and utilities, and a lot of others. And we are delighted that we've got the support and the sponsorship of the Linux Foundation and the Open Mainframe Project, and the opportunity to participate with Broadcom and with IBM to contribute to Zowe and bring something very, very important to market as we all work to help you do what you must do, which is best manage your investments and the total cost of ownership of your mainframe. Mainframe remains vital. We want to make it easier for you to justify that as you go through budget cycles. Alan?
Thanks, Jeff. Hey, I should also mention that Rocket Software was kind enough to sponsor this event today. You know, you got to keep the lights on here. You got to keep these platforms paid for, and we couldn't do it without sponsors like Rocket. So, Jeff, much thanks to you and the Rocket folks.
We're delighted to do that.
Thank you. The last panel member is more of my co-host than a regular panel member, but and that's why I saved him for last. He's the ED of the Open Mainframe Project at Linux Foundation. He's a published author in the realm of open source software. Sometimes can be technically challenged, though. It's my good friend, John Murdoch. John, how are you?
I'm well, Alan. Excited to have this group of folks together here, and you know the diversity that we have of this vendors speaks to what we see as the collaboration here. I mean, I think Alan, you well know from talking with a lot of our folks in the Linux Foundation, the project is successful bring competitors in these various industries together to build something that's sort of greater than the sum of everyone. And this is the thing that lifts up industries. So it's exciting to see this as really a exemplar of what collaboration in the mainframe industry can look like. And honestly, you could have it in the same light that you see in other industries as the top collaborations you're having too. So this is really cool.
Excellent. Absolutely. And John, thank you very much. Guys, before we start, and we actually already have stuff in chat and Q&A, but before we start, I wanted to run a quick poll that will help me and our panel sort of gauge where to come in here, right? And so I'm going to hit this polling, and I believe, I believe if you go under polls in your communication window, you'll see it there, or you might see it on your screens. If not, go to polls. But we're looking, are you familiar with Project Zowe? Right? Should we, do I got to start at what is Zowe, or do we hop in at a higher level? So I know no one likes to vote in polls, and when you don't know who you are, it's anonymous. But guys, take a second here and just, because it'll help us all understand where we need to be. All right, I'm going to close it in 3, 2, 1. Good enough. You know what? 2/3 of you are familiar with Project Zowe. Well, a couple of last minute votes there in right under the wire. So more than a third. Wow. Almost, well, I think it went 60-40 now. So 60% of you are familiar with Zowe, and about 40% are not familiar with Project Zowe. For those who are not familiar with Project Zowe, thank you very much for logging in. We're going to make sure you are familiar with it at the end of this day. Guys, are you surprised by that? Rose, Jeff, Joe, what do you think?
About the 2/3.
Well, it's closer to 60-40.
60-40. No, that's about what I would say. So it's quite hard for us to track the folks who are using Zowe. It's always nice to welcome new people. I can see a few names I recognize in the chat. I think Lionel and Ray Mullins, who are kind of amazingly well-respected mainframers, are also here. I think it's really nice that Zowe has actually managed to be in the sweet spot of bringing forwards experienced mainframers and helping very large customers, as Jeff talked about, who've invested in mainframe technology, but also bringing in the newer generation coming out of college or coming. So I think that's a nice balance point to always check that you're not too far one or the other.
Excellent. John, what do you? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Jeff.
I was going to say, I was going to build on that a little bit. It doesn't really surprise me, Alan, because as we think about Zowe, it's really oriented toward application development. Unless you happen to be a sysprog who was dragooned into installing Zowe in your enterprise, probably wouldn't hit your radar screen. But for everybody who's in the application development side, this is incredibly important and very, very valuable.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Rose?
I guess, Alan, I would have asked, the first question I would have asked is, whether or not you're familiar with mainframe, and then followed up with Zowe. Assuming everybody's familiar with mainframe, the 60-40 is a little surprising to me. I would have expected more folks to have heard about Zowe, particularly since, our mainframe-centric conferences now, many of them have Zowe tracks. And from that perspective, I feel like, wow, we've really arrived if we've gained our own full track worth of sessions at these large conferences. But hey, welcome. Now you've just kind of made it into the 60, right? Because we're going to be talking and educating you on Zowe.
Exactly. But Rose, you asked for it. Here it is.
Yeah.
Guys, if you go back to your poll, are you familiar with mainframe? Right. And again, I know everyone hates doing polling, but it really does help us understand where to jump in here. So if you wouldn't mind going back to polls and hitting it again there, I would imagine this is going to be overwhelmingly yes, but who knows? Maybe it's a lot of people just looking to modernize applications.
Mainframe curious folks.
Mainframe curious, yeah. Well,
Yes.
All right, I'll shut it down in 3, 2, 1. So look, 93% are familiar with mainframes. Only 3% are not. By the way, the yes/no on Zowe wound up at 56-44.
Okay.
Getting closer to half there.
See, a lot of opportunity is what I see there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
A lot of opportunity.
I love polling, right? You can imagine what I do with elections. So I'm better off here.
You're in Florida, so there you go.
Well, don't even go there with me. Okay? Anyway, let's focus in on mainframes and Zowe. So we do have a very mainframe savvy or mainframe, background audience, but again, 56% familiar. So I'm looking for someone here to give me sort of that baseline definition for someone out here in our audience who's not familiar with Zowe. How would you describe it in a nutshell to them? Who wants to take first crack at that? Rose, you're shaking your
Sure.
head. Go.
Yeah, sure, I can. I think I have a little bit of a different take on it because I try to look at it from, sort of a layman's perspective, not necessarily a super technical perspective. So if we think about, in general, over the past several years, more years than I think we care to admit, the mainframe platform in general has been searching for a means to be able to bridge the transition between folks who have been, have spent their careers in mainframe like myself, and ensure that the transition to a newer generation of mainframers becomes as easy and seamless as possible. We have a lot of mainframe talent that is getting up there in age. We all know that. That's no secret. Interested in retiring, and we want to ensure that the platform continues to run seamlessly and smoothly and is leveraged as much, if not more than ever, given its capacity and ability to do what it does best. But the approach that we've taken in the past, and I would say, generally was, just train them the way we were trained. And I think that we've learned that, I think one of the best ways forward is to take advantage of how the other environments onboard their technologists, and that it's easier to really not train at all and to make the environment more like those other platforms. And in my opinion, that's at the heart and soul of what Zowe is. It's a series of components that, when installed, I think of them in terms of a layer of technology that allows the mainframe to be integratable and accessible like the other platforms. And so we have technologies available to us like Visual Studio Code. We have technologies like APIs, RESTful APIs, and services and microservices, and terms that normally you would not have heard in association with the mainframe before Zowe. But Zowe is that enablement technology and lays the foundation and that initial layer, if you will, that affords us the ability to give mainframe those new characteristics.
Fair. Joe, Jeff, you want to add to that at all?
Joe, you go first.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Rose, absolutely phenomenal answer. I always love hearing you sort of talk about the project. One thing I'd like to add to that makes me and some of the folks that work on Zowe very proud is the role that Zowe plays in education. So as I mentioned before, the platform is 60 years old if you trace the lineage back to the original System 360. When I first became part of was introduced to mainframe through a transaction server called CSCS, coming from a Linux background, the first thing I had to do was download a terminal emulator and work out how to drive a green screen. And I found that wasn't familiar to me. I didn't have menu actions and drag and drop and point and click and all the things that I would expect on a modern GUI operating system. So one of the most successful things I think Zowe has done, and the best way for anybody in that 40% who doesn't know about it, as Rose talked about, with Visual Studio Code plugin, Visual Studio Code, you can get a plugin called the Zowe Explorer. From IntelliJ, you can get another plugin called Zowe Explorer, and you have that very familiar point and shoot way to just instantly become productive with familiar metaphors. Things are syntax colored. If you don't know the options, you just right mouse click. If you don't know the syntax, and that's been adopted by lots of mainframe education. Really, 2020 was very pivotal. It was when the pandemic started, so a lot of education classes to educate COBOL developers, to educate new to mainframe from what's now called IBM Z Explore. It was called Master the Mainframe. We get a lot of feedback from universities all over the world who are teaching their students the mainframe through Zowe technology. And as I think Lionel or somebody posted in the chat, the mainframe is very much a sort of hardware way to describe the mainframe computers. And in fact, you can actually get mainframe or IBM Zs as racks and just put it in a standard rack. So it's a very dated way that pays a nod to the heritage. But the mainframe is basically a very powerful, very secure, highly performant application server. And Zowe is able to open it up. How was that, Ray?
Well done, Joe.
That was great. It's great. So, it's kind of interesting about Zowe to me, that as I'm sort of hearing all of you talk, I mean, there's a technology layer component that has certainly changed. But then I also feel like there's a cultural level component that has changed here, right? I mean, mainframe has had its way of doing things for so many decades. And they were built on tried and true methodologies and experiences and things like that. And now, when we're talking of trying to do things like other platforms that's a culture shift within this community. And I'd be curious for all of you, because you've been very close to customers and vendors and folks like that. What has that been like?
So I'll leap in if I can. And as I do that, I'm going to echo what Alan said at the very beginning. The opportunity here certainly is for a conversation. Rose and John and Joe and I get together regularly. We hear each other talk, and certainly I feel like my reputation's magnified being on a panel with folks as bright and as observant as they are. But we've heard each other, and we're really keenly interested in what you have to say and what you have to think. The thing I'll observe, John, is we certainly have a bimodal user community now. As we take a look at the realities of the situation, the people who grew up with the mainframe, much like I did, and by the way, Rose, I started much earlier than you did. I did my first programming on paper tape and was hanging tapes and spinning discs way back in the late 60s and 70s. The people who are in my cohort are reaching a point where they don't look to be in the daily workforce anymore, one way or the other. And these are people who, just as I have spent 30, 40, sometimes 50, and even 60 years working with the mainframe. There is a depth of expertise that really can't be replicated through education. Some of it can be communicated. Some of it, though, has become instinct. And with candor, I'll use my wife as an example from a different situation. People who are in my cohort may be somewhat resistant to change. I know how things work. I don't want to adopt something new. Every time Bloody Windows comes out with a new version, and I give my wife a new laptop with a new version of Windows, I have 3 months of, let's just say, complaining. And there's certainly a
marital bliss, right?
Yeah. Well, some of that, though, Jeff, some of that, though, in fairness, is, I don't want to be less efficient and effective either.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. I've got the muscle memory in my fingers that I can get onto a terminal emulator and I can hit the PF keys and do exactly what I want to do. But we've got to recognize that my cohort's not going to last forever. And we do see really talented, really energized and enthusiastic younger professionals who are stepping up and saying, this looks like a great career. I want to go in this direction. But if we make them go in this direction by starting with assembler, which is let's just say it's pretty opaque language. It's not verbose. It's not self-describing. It is punishing in a lot of ways. We need to bridge that gap and give these younger professionals a better way to be successful. And that's a lot of what Zowe is all about. Zowe as open source becomes a platform on which any number of integrations or user experiences can be built. And it's then the obligation of those of us contributing to the project, the IBM folks, the Broadcom folks, the Rocket folks, and others. We do the heavy lifting on the back end of integrating with the old cranky subsystems that are still there, still useful, and going to be for generations like vSAN and IMS and so on, that will take the burden off of these new emerging professionals keeping our mainframes vital and let them be productive without having to go through the slog of the last 40 years as some of us have.
Yeah, I would add to that, Alan, just recently at a conference, I don't know about you, Joe, but several young to-be mainframers right out of college were so enthusiastic and excited to hear about the tenure, the stability of a career
Absolutely.
in mainframe. Yeah. That I think is as attractive as any of the newer technologies on some levels.
Absolutely, and we saw some of that with the pandemic. And somebody who I admire hugely, Dr. Cameron Say, on LinkedIn. If anybody doesn't follow him, please have a look. And I think, John, he might even be part of the OMP board as well. He's really vocal about education. And I remember one time saying, and he said to me, look at the stories, look at the people who are creating well-paid jobs, becoming vice presidents of companies who are able to then, support their families and, lift their children into, higher, perhaps put them through higher education when they didn't. That's just a phenomenal story around that empowerment. And that thrills me to see. Thanks, Rose. Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly making the mainframe much more not just open as a platform, but also open as a community to be a part of. And yeah, the stories are really amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, John, I think it's important for us to share with the audience that it isn't about joining a community because you have knowledge necessarily that you want to share. There's an opportunity to join the community to gain knowledge, to gain an understanding of those cranky subsystems that Jeff referenced, right? To gain an understanding of kicks in IMS and DB2 and truly learn about the mainframe as you're contributing in a skill set that you're familiar with. So it is possible that you come in with web skills or you come in with Visual Studio Code skills, and at the same time, you're learning new skills related to mainframe simply by being a part of the community.
Great. I you know what? So I am not as immersed in the community of any, as any of you are. I'm much more a media person. I observe it. I mean, I grew up. I'm contemporary of Rose and Joe and Jeff. I'm sure age-wise, but to me, Zoe represents a bridge to a new generation, and not just to a new generation of people. Yes, as all of you, I think, hit on. It is, to a new generation of mainframers. It's a bridge to a new generation of languages that we could use on the mainframe, to a new generation of application functionality that keeps it contemporary for a lot of what people are looking to do today. It's a bridge to hybrid environments, right? Where, you want to go run on the cloud and put stuff up there. It's great. The cloud does some things really well. It doesn't do what the mainframe does really well, though. And why would you want to, right? You shouldn't have to make that choice. So allowing us to use the best, as I've gotten older, I've learned it's the tools that make the man or woman, right? Using the right tool for the job saves you a lot of time and banging your head on the wall and idiot taxes that you pay. So Zoe is the bridge to those things and to a cultural thing where, Jeff or Rose or Joe, you could be at an event and you speak to two kids coming out of school, whether they're in India or in East Carolina is the school, right? The fellow you mentioned, and you could talk that same language and you still have that same, and you share a passion. I don't think we'd have that without Project Zoe, and I think I'm going to make that the last word on our foundational pieces here. I'd like to focus a little bit about what's new with Zoe, what's coming down the pike with Zoe. But we should also mention, we had a few questions. And the great thing about this audience is they answer their own questions, right? So, Jeff, you answered something for Ray about the difference between APPC style of coding, versus command lines and stuff like that. You've got stuff in there. A fellow named Joshua, he just wanted to comment that he's already authorized his developers to install the Code GPT plugin for Visual Studio to help with prompts and code checking. Wouldn't AI be just as helpful in filling the large knowledge gap that exists with COBOL? Has someone done that yet? If not, let's go do it.
There is some early stage work that we are seeing coming together that's looking at that as an approach. And there's some other investments that are very, very early stage in the Open Mainframe project that's looking at that. So, I mean, if that's an area of interest, definitely stay tuned, because that is, it's a commonality thing, I think, that we're seeing with folks that have had just code bases that are 20, 30 years old that can use some support in being able to just help look through and refactor and just do things a little bit more efficiently, because COBOL as a language has evolved there. The compilers, the tools, the technologies have just got better, and being able to have some intelligence to help do that is, we hear it a lot too. And there are some things that are coming that would be a really big boon to that.
Yeah, and John, can I add a little bit to that answer? So one of the things that is one of the successes that Zowe has is a foundational platform that then leaves other vendors space in the ecosystem to build plugins for that. And that's required that, Cathedral and Bazaar is a very good book about how that dynamic of open source and commercial works together. So with the Zowe Explorer for Visual Studio Code is very, very good at connecting you to ZOS and letting you do things like submit jobs and edit, create data sets and members and stuff. But it doesn't care about what the content of that is. So you can open a COBOL or a JCL or a Rex or PL1 file, and it's just basically, plain text. But everything about code page conversion and file locking, it does a phenomenal job at doing. If you then get into language extensions, you then will go and get plugins from, I think Broadcom has one called, Code for Z. IBM has one from IBM Z Open Editor, and they're available under different licenses for how you get support and things. So I don't ever think the base Zowe Explorer is going to provide something that's, provide that full fat kind of AI analysis. I think it might provide the extensions and the conformance program so that people can trust that vendors who have expertise in that space can bring that to their customers. That's how I see it.
Yeah, 100% spot on, Joe. I agree. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff. Were you going to say something?
No, you go ahead. Ladies first.
I'm trying to remember my train of thought as Joe was talking. He alluded to the conformance program, and that essentially, as we had mentioned earlier, if you think of it as a key enabler on which to build, and the on which to build is really the important part here. And the conformance program was put together by members of the community to ensure that all the extensible parts and pieces of Zowe conform to a specific set of guidelines that ensure interoperability at every major version of Zowe. And that really is key to ensuring that anyone who wishes to extend the capabilities ensures that consumers have a viable means of determining whether or not that particular extension is going to behave correctly with a specific version of Zowe. And the Linux Foundation gives us a wonderful means to display all of that in, some might think of it as a marketplace, but it's the OMP Zowe landscape, where all of the conformant vendors can proudly display their conformance badges. We also have a program for support providers as well. So folks who, various vendors who are able to provide comprehensive enterprise support for Zowe also have an opportunity to earn badges and display their badges to showcase their ability to support various core components of Zowe at each of the major versions.
Agreed.
And so if I can go in a slightly adjacent direction, I know this is not Zowe or necessarily open source, but I do want to put a plug in for Joe and IBM. Joshua, thank you for asking the question about using generative AI to do code translations. And there actually is activity in using generative AI to port COBOL to Java. Java, of course, which can transact on the mainframe and be eligible for the specialty engines. So not going to increase monthly license charges on chargeable products. So, take a look for IBM Code Assistant and Watson X. If you're going to be attending Think here in just a couple of 3 weeks, there's going to be a lot of activity around that and a lot of discussions from, I'm sure, all four of us, Broadcom, IBM, Rocket, and Open Mainframe Project.
Absolutely.
or anyone, right? And that's the value of the extensibility of Zowe, as Joe mentioned.
What I love, Jeff, is I could have taken that question and did exactly what you said, which is IBM's got all these great commercial offerings, but I didn't. I played the open. So thanks very much for doing that. You're absolutely right. I didn't want to push. One of the things that I enjoy about being in the Zowe community is I try as best not to push the IBM agenda into the room. I'm very respectful of the dynamic there. Yeah. But thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Talking about sponsors of open source and open source in general, most recently we've seen a spate of news stories in the media, as well as some pushback from the community around open source licensing, right? Some folks have been changing, you mentioned the cathedral and the bazaar, Joe, right? I was in open source when that book came out, basically, right? And to me, that very, described the open source movement of that day. And then we came into what I call the Big Brother era of open source, where most open source movements were one company really kind of controlled a project. And a lot of times that project was run for the benefit of that one company and its community. But it discouraged other players in the industry from participating. And then we moved into what I call the foundational era of open source, which is kind of where we are now, where organizations, not-for-profits like the Linux Foundation, allow Broadcom and Rocket and IBM and many others to all work together kind of for the common good of the community. And what empowers all that is the open source licensing that, hey, everybody gets that rising tide lifts all the boats. What you do from there is up to you. Rocket's going to go their way, IBM goes their way, Broadcom goes their way. But at that base level, we all play on an even keel and help each other. And I think the mainframe community and this open mainframe project is probably one of the best examples I've seen, having studied sort of the many tentacles of the Linux Foundation over many years here, right? It's not always like that in some of the other daughter foundations, let's say. But economic times are hard. We're all hearing about layoffs and budget cuts, and they can't afford to make, their Linux Foundation membership dues. They don't see a path to, ROI on it, right? The bean counters are involved. How do we ensure that Project Zowe doesn't fall victim to that, right? I'm not naming names, but we've seen some companies drop out of sponsoring Open Mainframe Project because of budget considerations. And, you can't put your hand in anyone's pockets, obviously. But John, I'll ask you to kick it off, because as the ED, this is your life day in and day out.
Yeah, it's the funny thing about open source is, while yes, the code and the technology is made available under a license of some nature, Zowe itself is made available under the Eclipse Public License version 2. The reality is to make this all come together, there's a lot of real work in the background. We at the Linux Foundation often call ourselves the janitors of open source. And it's really because the shining stars are the people in these communities that are making amazing technologies and doing really groundbreaking, innovative stuff that's only possible when they come together. But there's so much work and underpinning that makes all of that come and work. Just things like outreach and, being able to talk on webinars like this or on the technology, but then even behind the scenes of, can my organization leverage this technology from an IP perspective? Is this technology I'm using being audited from a security perspective? Can I trust that the upstream maintainers have the right guidance, the right tooling, the right infrastructure, so that I can use this in my environment? I can trust my business on top of it, and so on and so forth. So there's just so much that goes behind the scenes. That's sort of the unsungness of all of this, but is so critically important, to the point I wrote a whole book just on what that is. That's how important and how valuable it is. What I always just say to companies is start and try this technology first. See if it works for you. See if it's helping you, seeing if it's adding value for you. And then think of technologies and projects like this as an investment, like you're making into anything else. You want to make your own products better. You invest by hiring more people. You invest by bringing in product managers, experts, sort of different toolings and technologies in there. You kind of have to think of these open source foundational investments the same way. The beauty is these investments here are having multipliers that come with them. And that's kind of like a way to begin to start to think about it. And that investment's going to be different than everyone. But what I will say, and I think we have 3 companies here that can really vouch for this, the more you put in, the multipliers of what you get out grow even faster. You get a single, couple X multiplier if you're just using it for free, but you're putting in funding, you're putting in developer time, you're putting this, everyone you're putting in, probably some of your organizations are getting 20, 30X multipliers coming right out of it. That are just that are just things that really show the value of it. So that's kind of like how I tend to begin to think about it. Even when I'm talking to new customers, I'm probably a horrible salesperson on membership because of that. I just say, hey, look, go try this out. Like, if it works for you, if it's giving you business value, here's your path to invest. But anyways, you all are kind of the big members. Like, what do you like? I mean, is that sort of like how you begin to think about this as well? Is that how you begin to kind of say, hey, this is why we put, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars into this?
So John, the answer is yes, and
good. Still on it.
So that's exactly right. As a product manager, one of the things I shudder to hear is, well, let me download your code and play with it. That's one of those things that leads to the sales cycles that just seem to go on forever. But it's also where most of the technologists start. They want to get hands-on. They want to see, what can I do with this? Can I break it? If I can't break it, what is it good for? And that then develops some groundswell from the development community, say we ought to use this. The end is, as it starts to gain momentum in an organization, they also have to be cognizant of the realities of using any software, whether it is open source or commercial, in production. Particularly for my friends who are in regulated verticals, particularly for my friends who are operating mainframes that are subject to EU regulation like DORA, you've got to testify that you've got support. And that's where Broadcom, IBM, and Rocket do step in. We provide professional level support for open source. We guarantee the integrity and safety of the software supply chain. We provide immediate fixes for vulnerabilities that are identified so that you can use this open source in production, reduce your overall licensing cost obligations, and still be assured that you've got something available in terms of professional support, 7x24 worldwide, so that you can have somebody be there for you if something does happen to your production environment. Anything you'd add to that, Rose?
Yeah, I guess what I would add to that is that we ourselves, all of the major vendors, are building solutions and capabilities on this base open source technology. And that, in my opinion, speaks volumes. At Broadcom, we have what we call an open first strategy. And that is, simply, leverage the open source components as you move your mainframe into the future and, determine your right workload, right platform. It truly is what enables your business to make the right decision.
So it's almost like a combination of, yes, there's like a savings of ROI that way, but then you're also saying there's like an economic opportunity that opens up that makes this all possible. Is that sort of a fair way to talk about it?
I think so. I mean, it's very similar to the model that Red Hat adopted and that popularized and practicalized, if I can coin that word, the use of Linux in the enterprise. You know, the Linux operating system was available for free, but Red Hat gave professional, worldwide technical support so that the operating system could be used effectively. The thing that we also see is that there's a lot of appetite and energy out there for use of this, not just by IBM, Broadcom, and Rocket. I mean, we're here, we embrace it, we love it, but we're also seeing other software vendors and other enterprises begin to adopt Zowe to present their own applications. Phoenix Software, one of the well-known players in the market, Ed and his people there are using Zowe to create their user interfaces for their new product offerings. Joe and Rose and John and I were all at the Zowe Day. Was that at Think conference last September? Do I recall?
Yeah, that was in New Orleans. Yeah, we had Paul
in
Heinrich from Sega Software there, and we had Susan Weiss from BMC as well.
Yeah. So you know, certainly we're here and we're promoting it, and you'll hear our voice and our excitement. But it's not just us. There's a much bigger community now that's getting involved, which, you know, both frustrates us and helps us, because they come to us and say, "Hey, I tried this and it didn't quite work the way I expected. What the heck's going on?" And then we have to come together as a community and figure out, well, is this working correctly, or is it working as expected? And if not, just like any open source project, we come together and devise the appropriate response.
Fair. Guys, you know, we were worried about, are we going to be able to fill the hour?
I told you,
Alan.
And it's safe to say we will, but we didn't touch on a very important part of this, right? And Joe brought it up to me in the chat is, hey, Zowe V3 is coming out here, right? And for those of you who are Zowe heads, right? And we've got Lionel, and I pinned Lionel's quote right to the top of our chat today, right? It's not a mainframe, it's a server. But anyway, for the people who are, you know, heavily invested and heavily into Zowe, what's upcoming? What do we got there coming down the pike here to get them excited? Joe?
Yeah, sure. I'll tackle it first, just because I know. So thanks very much. So for everybody who's using Zowe today, thank you very much for your sort of trust of the platform. What's coming up right now is the version 3 this year. We did plan to GA version 3, I think perhaps last month. That's been delayed for September the 30th for folks who haven't caught up with that news. And there's a number of reasons why. I won't go into it too much, but basically version 3 is going to be a more stable and a better release. So the big things to expect in version 3, and I think, Lionel, you asked about install and configuration. We get a lot of feedback from customers trying to install and configure the ZOS components of Zowe, which is a Zowe desktop and the Zowe API mediation layer. And it can be tricky, right? And we haven't So one of the amazing projects that is going on right now, the code word is Zen. I think it's going to GA with a slightly better name. And that's basically an install wizard. And that's been developed. And that is available right now. If anybody wants to, they can just go into github.com/Zowe/Zen, download it and engage with it. Shortly, it should be available for download in tech preview. That will be part of it. So we're really looking to make that onboarding experience better. There's just a number of components in version 2 that we need to look at the longevity and the sell-by date of those components in the Zowe desktop and the mediation layer. So Netflix, Zowe, there's some other libraries and stuff. We have to do due diligence at what we're packaging in open source. The bill of materials has enough future shelf life that we can basically underwrite everybody's investment in that. So that's something we're doing. And a lot of Zowe, within the Zowe command line interface, which is also, there's two ways you can configure profiles. And the team configuration, which is more enterprise, is going to be the only way going forward for version 3. All of the version 1 will be removed from that. And we'll also support Java 17 as well. That was a really quick answer. Rose, do you want to add to that?
Well, I just want to add, for those of you who are interested in staying on or upgrading to the stable release of Zowe, which V2 will be transitioning into when V3 goes live, is, to keep in mind that, we launched V1, I wrote the date down here, I think it was February 28th of 2020. We're going to be ending support September 30th, 2024. That's 4 long years of support. And as Jeff mentioned, if you so desire, support from, a reputable mainframe organization. Hopefully, many of you who have been hesitant to install and start building on Zowe will be comfortable installing V2, because V2 will be around for several more years after we launch V3. However, V1 is coming near the end of its term at the end of September, and so we encourage all of you to certainly upgrade at least to V2 with plans to upgrade to V3. One more point I wanted to mention before I forget is that when we introduce a new version, we also introduce a new conformance program. There may or may not be conformance changes. We, as the onboarding squad lead, the onboarding squad puts forth a number of educational series related to the new version that's up and coming. We call them office hours. And we have office hours that are dedicated to an extender of Zowe to ensure that they're prepared for the new release. And we have office hours that are dedicated to consumers of Zowe. So those of you who are simply installing and using Zowe, we can prepare you for any up and coming changes that Joe mentioned, as well as any others that you should be aware of. But most importantly, we want to ensure that you are all comfortable with the release that you're on, and that you have the support that you need when you need it. And if you're interested in being on a release that obtains continuous upgrades, in other words, you are anxious to be able to receive the more current capabilities of Zowe, then you need to be on the latest and greatest, which will be V3, and that release will receive continuous updates until it transitions to maintenance mode.
Fair?
So just some release tips and tricks.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Really quickly, interrupt. I forgot to mention the IntelliJ plugin for Zowe Explorer will become part of GA in version 3. It's currently in incubator. Sorry, Alan.
It will become core, which means it will be covered by comprehensive support providers. So that's an important note. Thanks, Joe.
Okay. Hey, doing a little housekeeping. Jeff, you wanted to expand, I think, on Joe's answer to Lionel. It was kind of off stage.
Yeah, more importantly, wanted to make sure that we recognize the question from Lionel, and that we are all working together to do things to reduce the amount of time between installation and joy, if I can use the phrase my chief product officer used. And it's certainly relevant to recognize that this again hits that bimodal user or customer base that we have, because Zowe does exploit a great deal of Unix system services. And again, the systems programmers who are my cohort and older, they may not have fully embraced the Unix system services. They haven't had the experience that Joe had of coming up through a Linux or a Unix background. There are a lot of things that we're doing with Zen and with other steps to reduce the burden of getting all of the Zowe components installed and operating, even in that subsidiary operating environment on mainframe. Look for good things to come forward to make it much, much easier, much, much quicker.
Excellent. Guys, we're right up on the hour. If you don't mind, I'm going to take the last couple seconds here.
You got it.
Joe, Rose, John, Jeff, thank you so much. This is the first time we've done one of these live, but I think you all see the power of having a live audience kind of drive some of the conversation, because you may not get a chance to say everything you wanted to say, but you got from there, you're answering people's questions and wants and suggestions. So, it's a great format. I love doing these formats. Jeff, particularly to you and the folks at Rocket, again, thank you for sponsoring. We just can't do these without sponsorships. I'm sorry, but it's the market economy at play here. To all of you and your companies, thank you for supporting the Open Mainframe. Most of all, to everyone, and Cody informs me, we had almost 300 people registered for this, and we've had a constant flow of anywhere from 60 to 80 people on at any given time throughout the hour. So to all of you who registered, whether you're watching this live with us or maybe you're watching it on demand, thank you for coming in here. The mainframe is alive and well. Thank you. Project Zowe is the B12 shot that it needs, and it's working. So we'll hopefully do more of these. And as I said, we've got 3 years worth of open mainframe discussions up on techstrong.tv. Go check them out. And we look forward to seeing you on the next Open Mainframe project. Again, on behalf of Techstrong Group, the Open Mainframe, IBM, Broadcom, and Rocket Software. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.